Hi, Senator.
Here we go. He might be. Okay, hi, Ben Allen. Yeah, we're just doing it. I am here with Dr. Judy Mikovits, who is a world-renowned expert on Mikovits. I know everybody mispronounced your name.
No, I'm not Judy.
We're here at a lovely Santa Barbara, sitting in a restaurant. But I didn't want to miss an opportunity because she's so valuable in what she has in her head from her cancer research, and especially about vaccines. So if you were to take someone like Ben, who from a moral and ethical perspective, really feels like SB 277 is a good bill, because he feels like what this bill does is it will reduce the number of children who are unvaccinated, and the result then is that some of these immunocompromised kids that otherwise would not be able to come to school can then come to school because everyone around them has been vaccinated for the 10 diseases that are on SB 277. I feel that that's a complete misnomer, and I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Yeah, the fallacy in that is, of course, that the vaccines are protective. So the definition of what a vaccine's job is to enable the vaccinated to produce an immune response. Usually it's an antibody response, a basic immune response, and then adaptive or T-cell responses. And so the idea then is to quickly clear the pathogen.
So is it to enhance the immune system then?
It's to allow the immune system, let's just say, a head start.
Yeah.
So the immune system sees an attenuated piece of the pathogen, and it can mount an immune response so that if it ever really sees it in real life, then it can quickly respond and prevent the spread and prevent the inoculated from ever getting sick, or getting only a very mild form of the disease and not a deadly form of the disease.
So
the concept itself is fabulous. And I don't think there's anybody in this country that wouldn't say that vaccinations from the time of Jenner and earlier have saved billions of lives worldwide from devastating things. But the vaccine of Ben's Father's Day is not the vaccine of 1990 and beyond. And the vaccination schedule, in fact, and the fact, I think what most people, so I'm 57 years old. Now, I remember being vaccinated. They'd line us all up in kindergarten, and we were all afraid, and we were all crying, and they would inject us in our arms. So, and we remember that. And a little pain around the injection site and things like that. We got one thing. We either got, to test to see if we needed a TB shot or just a measles vaccine itself. And but now what happens, and we could talk. We could tell mom if we were sick. Whether we had a fever or not. We could in fact mount an immune response, and if we did have an adverse reaction to it, which there are many adverse reactions to these, they're not rare, and they could range anything from a mild rash to a fever of a couple days so you don't feel well and you have to miss school, which is basically what would happen to most American children who got measles, chickenpox, or the others.
I want to pause you right there, because one of the things I like to have happen is when people make a very emphatic statement, which you just did. You just said vaccine injuries are not rare. Can you define your experience that's led you to that belief?
Because my experience has been in adverse events with all immune therapy, with cancer patients, with AIDS patients, with babies, with elderly, and most 99% of the adverse events are never reported. patients have and people have a problem. Well, I don't want to bother him. You know, I've got this horrible rash. I've developed this horrible all over my body. I have a fever. Look at me. Have a girlfriend who's also 57, just got a series of shots to travel to Africa, and the hepatitis A shot in vaccination was one of them. She had a horrible reaction. She never reported it. So the reported adverse events are often missed. So we won't necessarily say that's a vaccine-induced adverse event if I had a horrific migraine for 3 days and I never had a migraine before. Most doctors will say that's unrelated because the package insert doesn't say horrible migraine in so many people.
And that's documented that between 90 and 99% is what they estimate of all negative reactions to all medications go unreported.
Correct.
So that's very well documented.
Correct.
One thing that I'd love for you to talk about, because I think it's a concept that helps people understand that vaccines are medicines.
Yeah.
They're very clearly a bell curve, just like with all medicines, where you have a certain small percentage that don't respond at all with any immune response, and then you have the other side of the bell curve that hyper responds, which is your vaccine injury. Can you explain that?
Well, sure. It's like anything. We're all genetically different and epigenetically different. You know, if we're by the ocean, if we're by areas where there are high levels of arsenic or you know, heaven forbid, lead, as we know from Flint, or if we even have these floors full of formaldehyde. You know, we live in a very different world with very different immune stressors. So, and any medication. I mean, I work with cancer patients most of the time, and it's like, I don't want chemotherapy. I say, aspirin is chemotherapy. It's a chemical and it's therapy. You know, and yet we have 100,000 bleeding-related deaths from aspirin every year, and nobody worries about it because aspirin does a lot of good for people, and most people don't have an adverse reaction. So every time you have any therapy whatsoever, there's a possibility for an adverse reaction.
So do you think then that the way that vaccine injury was represented at the hearing, SB 277, was a misrepresentation of what's really happening?
It wasn't at all accurate, and I just wanted to say before from talking about when we were 5 years old and we were standing up being vaccinated and we had a fully mature immune system, we've only learned in the last 3 to 5 years really how the immune system is not mature until you're 3 years old, how the gut microbiome, the good bacteria that help you 10 times more than the cells in your body, aren't fully developed till you're 3 years old, and how the liver enzymes, the critical pathways for detoxification of everything else that's in that needle, aren't fully developed till you're 3 years old. And you know, the studies are now being done and we're understanding toxicities and things, but we inject babies in the first 24 hours of life, and we have no idea what their genetics are. We have no idea.
As a scientist who's done ethical research on cancer drugs, one confusion I have, and perhaps you can help me, is how do you get to a point where you can ethically inject a baby that's less than 12 hours old without having injected a trial on less than 12-hour-old babies, and same with pregnant women. How do we ever arrive at that place where we say it's safe and effective without using human guinea pigs to get there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, we do a lot of studies on cells in a test tube where we take young cells, we call them cord blood cells, right out of the umbilical cord cell, and then we can expose them to the ingredients in the vaccine, all of the excipients, all of the polysorbate 80, the casein, the amino acids, the detergents, everything else that is in that, including the aluminum, and we can ask what happens to those cells. Do they die? Do they excrete a lot of cytokines and chemokines, antibodies? What do they do.
Sure.
So that gets closer, but that's still considered an in vitro experiment.
So
and
how do we make that jump?
Well, we actually don't. I don't think there's ever any ethical reason to vaccinate a pregnant woman or a child unless they're high risk of losing their life from whatever they were or could be exposed to.
And I think that's a real breaking point for a lot of people if they really could break it down that way, because I think they can look at the measles and go, you know what, we have measles, so let's prevent measles and get it in our 2-year-old. And we have pertussis, and we don't have to talk about it being a family vaccine. That our pertussis rate has been skyrocketing for the last 10 years. But when you get to the pregnancy shots and the teed up, I think is what they do in pregnancy, and the flu shot, and you see the under 12-hour-old hepatitis B shot, I can't. It's the one point that I think people can finally realize we don't have the data on this stuff.
We don't.
They pretend we do, but we don't. Can you speak to that?
Well, and many of my colleagues, yes, I can. Many of my colleagues in cancer research, I talked to my business partner and longtime mentor colleague, Dr. Frank Rossetti, and I said, yeah, they inject 20. He said, don't be ridiculous. That's a pararetrovirus. Don't be ridiculous. You're wasting my time. And if you knew Frank, he's a very angry man. But so, and I'm like, it's true, Frank.
You got a lot of hearts for that one.
It's true. And his wife, so Sandy, we were at the kitchen table, and Sandy went up and she got Marcus, their only child, who was born in 1986, and she got his vaccination records. And she said, no, he wasn't vaccinated before he was 2 months old. You know, and he wasn't vaccinated with anywhere near the 69 shots of 16 different antigen that a baby gets before they're 3 years old. So before they're even mature immunologically, before that blood-brain barrier, before the methylation machinery, the epigenetics that can do gene regulation of everything we do, that changes right at birth and resets itself to a new pattern depending on the environment of the individual. We don't know anything about these systems. We just learn.
We've never tested them.
We've never tested
collectively, individually, and I think it's a really hard thing for people to even fathom that they just haven't been tested.
And so Frank and Sandy said, what changed? And I said, the law. And we took away any kind of responsibility for injury, so there's no liability, not drug companies, not doctors, not governments, not anyone, and you can basically inject at will anything you want in a defenseless infant without his or her parents' permission, and we can't, and you can't do anything about it, or you end up, if you speak out as a scientist, you lose your job. Even worse, if you speak out, you'll never get a grant. If you show data, if you show an inconvenient truth of, maybe these things aren't safe at all, then of course you're buried.
So if we were going to try to talk to Ben in one area that he's very acutely aware of, he considers himself a civil libertarian. I don't mean to snicker, but the concept of motivation about product safety. Which is we've eliminated every possible motivation to ever make a safer product. Not only that, but we've created in California a system to legally test these kids on these vaccines to ship them other places. And we've set that up with SB 277. And it's just shocking to me that they
And what we're here to discuss tonight, which is the worst of all, is just this year California ran out of flu vaccine that didn't have mercury in it.
Well, they did not actually. They said they did.
Okay, and they legalized in one fell swoop. Okay, it's fine. Give everybody a known neurotoxin. So when I worked in my lab with mercury-containing thermometers a long time ago, if you dropped that mercury and broke that thermometer on the floor and that little dot rolled around on the floor, they brought in a hazmat team. We had a suit on. They cleared the whole area, and you're injecting.
And you're injecting that into a baby.
Into your toxic levels into a 2-month-old or younger, and into a pregnant woman, and it's just beyond comprehension. And see, nobody knows. And that's what Ben doesn't. I'm sure he doesn't
he
realize
absolutely
this.
doesn't get
Nor do
hate to bring it to you, you don't get it.
Nor do Frank or Sandy, because as Frank said, that's ridiculous. They don't do that. And I'm like, look,
It's unfathomable.
and we found out. In fact, they did. In fact, we had a patient, a family member who had a neuroimmune disease, a father, and he brought a picture on his cell phone of his 2-month-old baby son after he got vaccinated. And that changed everything for Frank. He said, okay, what do you want me to do? And we started researching, and he got angrier and angrier. We just wrote a book chapter on the host response to simply the antigens in the vaccine. Just, can you give 10 different things? 10 gram positive, 1 gram negative, 1 double-stranded DNA virus, 1 pararetrovirus, 1 RNA virus, all of that at one time. In one injection or 2 injections in a 2-month-old, and send the immune system here, there. It's like your iPhone. It's junk, and it has no idea what to do.
It would never happen in nature.
How did that
Never happen in
Excuse me,
nature.
but you're getting
And you
at the
keep
end
a
of the-
baby from being exposed. And that critical question of what Ben's worried about, the immune-compromised children, is because the vaccinated or the inoculated or the injected, they're not vaccinated because they're not immune. So they're actually shedding the components and putting more children at risk of infection.
Can you speak a little bit to that with the live virus vaccines?
Absolutely. With the live virus vaccines,
What happens?
They form no antibodies, they form no immune response, and you're literally shedding. The pathogen is allowed to replicate at will, and you're shedding the pathogen. And so that.
And those kids are going to school.
And those kids are going to school,
vaccinated.
getting other kids sick.
And we absolutely know that
We
that's going on with
absolutely
the
know that's
pertussis
happening.
vaccine.
That's
Well,
exactly right.
and they're vaccinating on campus. I mean,
Michelle, by the way.
hi, they're, I think it was September or October that all of the school locations in the school district where my kids go to school, they were having flu clinics where all the kids could go and get their flu shot.
And they're pressured if they're
Yeah.
over. Okay,
And
so
they're
I want to
pressured.
go into, again, the bell curve. I want you to use your hands, demonstrate the concept of a bell curve.
Okay.
Because it's just like all other medications. You have the non and under responders, and then the hyper responders, which is consistent in every drug ever tested, right?
Right, correct.
So vaccines are no different. We absolutely have the hyper responders, and every time they have a vaccine, that first time hyper responder in vitro to the flu shot and the DPT will also hyper respond to the Hep B, and it's
Correct.
cumulative.
It's
right?
It's cumulative and it's synergistic.
Right.
Which all of these things are in a vacuum, which is never done in cancer research. As Bob knows, any time we add a drug to a combination, you have to go through phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical
Right.
trials
Oh, yeah.
all over again, or it's considered a new drug. In vaccine, you can add whatever you want. You can throw one after another. You don't know how they interact in combination.
How the hell do they get away with that? I mean, that's
Because they have no
nobody
liability.
knows.
and you're doing it to infants,
Well, and you try.
newborn kids.
Like I tried to teach.
They have no chance in their life. And the rare is up to 30%. The number is probably between
Right.
6 and 10%. Is 10% of our population at risk of lifelong disease and suffering, and even early death from cancers and worse? Is that the greater good? They're certainly not immune, which is the definition, because they're shedding viruses.
You mean this
because
group of
they're-
people that hyper respond
and under respond? That 10%. That's not the greater good. We're actually spreading these diseases.
Right.
We're actually spreading the
The other
disease.
thing that I think people don't understand who haven't really researched this is vaccine injury that has been compensated from the vaccine injury compensation court. So it went all the way through courts,
Right.
and they determined, yes, this child died from this vaccine. Yes, this child was crippled with a seizure disorder for life. Here's my question to you. I have seen everything from eczema to psoriasis to death in 1 day to death in 30 days. Every possible expression of a negative response to vaccine, unending.
Right, unending.
And it says to me that if that's the possibility,
Right.
then the lesser versions of that are unbelievably prevalent, and we just don't
Absolutely.
know. Is that what you think?
Well, we don't want to.
And we have no idea which kids it'll be.
We actually have looked. Yeah, that's why you don't where you don't inject a baby before they're 3 years old. When they're walking, when they're talking, when you know if they're chronically ill, when you know if they're sensitive, if they have food allergies or anything else, when you know if they have gastrointestinal distress or if you can't clear the toxin, if you know this is what Johnny's like, oh, she's always been a sickly child, well, then you treat her differently.
Right.
And we always have, and that's the way we did it when we were growing up.
Well,
And everything changed in 1990.
Here's the other thing that I believe to be true from my research and the doctors that I've talked to before you. The concept is fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure these immunocompromised kids, after their chemotherapy and all of these things, they're not excluded to school because you've got, Mary Measles and
Right.
Pete pertussis and these kids in these classrooms. My understanding of the real milieu of microbes in classrooms is that those, statistically speaking, aren't the problem. It's the MRSA and the strep infection and the flu that wasn't in the vaccine. That those same kids simply should not be in a classroom because of all the non-vaccine preventable microbes that we simply have no control over. Would you say that's true?
The best way, yes, it's a simplistic version, but everything we're talking about is simplistic. But the best way to provide immunity for everyone is a strong immune system.
Right.
Anything that weakens that immune system is a bad idea. And so whether it be toxic metals in the environment, genetically modified food, pesticides on food, non-organic foods, anything is that weakens the immune system or causes it to be hyper responsive or under responsive. I was just preparing for actually being an expert witness in vaccine court, and so I was rereading the textbook on vaccine and autoimmunity, which came out a few years. Yehuda Schoenfeld, who described the ASIA, the adjuvant syndrome related
Induced
to
autoimmunity.
adjuvant-induced autoimmunity syndrome. And so that is, autoimmunity from adjuvants, and the infections can act as adjuvants. And as you said a few minutes ago, never does anybody's immune system see 10 things at a time. So you do low-level, natural antigenic stimulation. You're exposed to just a little bit of something, and then you develop an immunity to it, and it's not systemic. It's not, you're not injecting an incompetent, compromised. By definition, a two-year-old infant is immune compromised. By definition, somebody over 65 is immune compromised.
Or being American hyper-vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Here's another thing that is a concept that hit me a long time ago that is actually represented in the literature, but nobody talks about it, which is when we get sick, our immune system gets stronger.
Yeah.
When we have a cold,
when we
have the flu and a fever and snot and lay down for 3 days, our immune system learns new skills.
Correct.
And we're taking all of that away from our children.
Right. Like basic science, it's explained with the innate immune system and then the
adaptive immune system.
Yeah, the adaptive immune system. You are already naturally.
Right.
Your body, in a way, you should be getting these diseases and stuff because your body, your immune system basically gets
stronger.
And that goes into the Th1, Th2. Can you explain that a little bit to people so they understand that you don't just get more of one without the other being sacrificed?
Right. Well, so it's just different T cell responses.
Okay.
So you get a T cell response that'll respond to viruses, that's Th1. You get a T cell response that'll respond to parasites, that's Th2. You have a Th17 response that is important in allergies or chronic disease infections.
There are literally thousands
Yeah.
of different T cells.
Yeah, there
Not
are
all
literally
T cells are the
thousands
same.
of different. There's not a one
Maybe
and
more.
a two. It's
Okay.
not an either and an or. I have a figure in my bag, and you could see the picture of everything we've learned. And what's important about that is they all have feedback mechanisms. So to answer your question briefly about getting stronger, why do you go to the gym?
Right.
Because when you stretch a muscle
Like another margarita? Sure.
and you tear a muscle, you injure it. And the process of wound healing is the same inflammatory process.
She never dropped her phone, and I just dropped it. I'm so sorry. Dinner was just served. I wanted to go over this thing that I came up with because I feel like right now we are at a time when kids are going to be vaccinated more
Right.
because of that species.
Right.
And I think because there's so much denial of vaccine injury, they don't want to give guiding principles around if you are going to vaccinate.
Right.
So I came up with this acronym SHOTS, SHOTS, which is, I was trying to look it up. I think it's something for single, one at a time, heavier,
When the child is heavier.
right, single, heavier, I forgot what the
Older,
O is.
older. Uh-huh.
Never with Tylenol, never when sick.
Correct.
Is that huge?
That's going to prevent a great deal of injury.
Wouldn't that be huge if they just did that?
Yeah, we're all for safe vaccination. I spent my whole life trying to cure disease. Certainly, the first thing we look at is prevent it. Prevent it. Well, the easiest way to prevent everything we're seeing is stop injecting anybody before they're 3 years old unless they're high risk. Then everybody at school is the same, and I guarantee you most of those kids at school aren't exposed to mumps before they're 3 years old, and aren't exposed. And tetanus isn't even a communicable disease. So why are we
There's a
injecting?
thing, right?
Yeah.
So you would say, because one of my asks for someone like Ben, who
Yeah.
right now is bought into this law,
Right.
would be somehow notify these parents that they did the shots, single, heavier, one at a time, never with Tylenol, and never when sick.
Right.
Okay.
That we could reduce vaccine injury by 80%.
80%, probably even
Easily.
more,
Easily.
even 90%. And
Right.
isn't that why we're here?
Yeah.
Is
so-
to keep people
so
from getting sick.
Kids could go to CVS or Walgreens or somewhere instead of a pediatrician who's going to line them up 6 at a time and say, oh, here's the free Tylenol. Can you really quickly explain the Tylenol and why it's so important to avoid before and after vaccination?
Because as I mentioned earlier, your liver detox systems aren't fully mature at all, and Tylenol is extremely hard on the liver, on a class of enzymes in the liver that are really important.
And it
for
also reduces the fever, which is your
Right.
body's response.
Yeah, that's your inflammatory response. You need a fever to respond.
So we're
That's how
basically
you-
trading a childhood of no inflammatory response, no practice to excrete stuff out of our body. It's sitting idle the whole time. We're ramping up the antibody side of it, expecting it to do everything, and then wondering why our adults are getting sick with all these things they should have had as kids.
Right, and just all our kids are sick. Everybody, 1 in 2.
One and
As
two.
Stephanie Seneff-
tinyurl.com/1 and 2.
And as Stephanie Seneff, Dr. Seneff from MIT said, if we do nothing about this in 20 years, in the next generation, 1 in 2 kids will be sick.
No, we'll
Asthma.
have autism.
Or
Right now, we already have. Right now,
We always-
54% of our kids already have a diagnosis.
Right.
54%.
In other words, we don't know the results of all this stuff going on.
Yeah, we do. It's screwing
Because,
up everybody.
well, no, but I'm saying 20 years from now,
20 years
which will
from
then
now.
be too late,
Right.
we'll have basically,
And-
it's like
and-
asbestos or something like that. It was
Exactly.
great, but it turned out to be
Right.
toxic.
And the prudent thing
But
to
we're
do.
doing it legislatively.
Yeah, the prudent thing to do, as we did with asbestos, is the minute we saw the potential for injury,
Right.
stop it. But in this case, we know the potential for injury, and we've seen it now for a good decade, and we're doing
So
nothing
talk to Ben.
about
What would you tell Ben to do?
it. Put a moratorium on that law.
So he
and-
doesn't.
and
He's not
for-
responsible for any kids
for further
getting
study,
vaccinated because
correct.
of this law.
Correct.
Okay,
and,
perfect.
and do further study. And I say for all vaccination, federal laws that say nothing before they're 3. Stop everything until we figure out what's going on.
Perfect. Thank you.
Like I
Oh, wait, how do I? Now I need to turn it off. I don't know how. Okay, this could get fun really quick.
How about your birthday card?
Okay. Amen. See you soon. Ben, it's on you, buddy.